Welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We'll begin shortly. We're just waiting for all the attendees to make their way into the Zoom. Meanwhile, we'd really love to know the disciplines in the room today. So if you could put your discipline in the chat, that would be great. We just give ourselves a minute or two to let people join and settle in. Welcome all. If you've just joined us and you are staring at some silent faces, don't be alarmed. We're just letting people settle in. And if you didn't hear me saying it before, just wanted to say if you could put your disciplines in the chat, that'd be great. Thanks, I could see you started to do that. Brilliant. Right. Well, my instructions say I'm supposed to wait till 2 past to actually kick this off officially. It's 2 past, so now I'm allowed to say hello and welcome to the latest event from the Digital Good Network. My name is Sarah Wajid. I'm the Communities and Cultural Engagement Lead for the network, and I'm also co-CEO of Birmingham Museums Trust. This event is being professionally live captioned. If you'd like to have captioning, you can select captions using the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. There's also a live stream of the transcript, and details of that are in the chat. Thanks to Christy for providing the captions today. Before we get started, the inevitable housekeeping chat. The event's going to be recorded on Zoom and it'll be available on our website shortly after the event. Panelists are going to speak for about 8 minutes each. Then we'll open up the discussion and take some questions from the audience. Your questions can be asked through the Q&A function and we'll share those throughout the discussion. Please don't put your questions in the chat. It just gets very confusing, mainly for me. Do follow and tag us on Twitter, Mastodon, and LinkedIn at Digital Good Net. We'll be using the hashtag #DigitalGood. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Nalima Sunil, Robin Steedman, Louise Hickman, and Ros Williams. I'll ask them all to introduce themselves at the start of opening remarks. And before we do that, I just wanted to tell you a bit about the network and our plans over the next couple of years. Ros will then speak about the opportunities we currently have open, including our research funding. So the Digital Good Network is a £4 million investment from the ESRC, and we're building a research community focused on what good digital society should look like and how we get there. There's often a focus on online harms and the dangers of the digital world, but we want to ask, what do our future digital society look like? What do we want our future digital society to look like? Not what pitfalls are we trying to avoid, what harms we want to dismantle, but what positively do we want a good digital society to look like? And as part of that, we're bringing disciplines and sectors together. You'll notice that I'm a museum director, not an academic. That should give you some sense of how interdisciplinary this project is. We want to bring disciplines and sectors together, and I'm especially excited by the community and cultural partnerships. So we'll support and fund interdisciplinary research, internships and fellowships. We'll provide training and host events, and we'll engage widely with policy, industry, practitioners, communities, and civil society, including museums. I'll turn to our speakers, who will talk about their experiences of applying for research funding as early career researchers, and we look forward to hearing from you. So I'm going to go in this order. First Nalima, then Louise will speak to us, then Robin, and then Roz. So if you're ready, Nalima, I'll hand over to you, please, to introduce yourself. Just a quick reminder about sharing of pronouns. Mine is she and her. Oh, and I should also give a visual description of myself, which is that I've got slightly messy, spiky hair today. I'm blaming the snow for that. Black and white glasses, and I'm an Asian woman. Oh, with lipstick on my teeth. Over to Nalima.
Thank you, Sarah. So I guess I should start with my description first then. Not prepared, but yeah, I think pronoun would be she, her, and tiny Asian woman. Definitely messy, frizzy hair. Thank you, Manchester weather today. Wearing, there's a purple background behind me, and I'm wearing a greenish furry whatever this is. So thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, great to be here. Great to talk about what was being talked about today. Very interesting topic. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Neelima, Dr. Neelima Shailaja. I'm a transitional assistant professor at the University of Nottingham. I'm based in the Department of Computer Science and the Digital Economy Research Hub. So I'm a multidisciplinary researcher. My research is around human data interaction, where I study the socio-technical implications of AI and personal data use, and also technology sustainability and digital inclusion. So here I look at hardware and software repair practices and sustainability, especially across societies, geographies, and demographies. Most of my work is applied research, very in the wild rather than in the lab. I work extensively with industry, where BBC are one of my major collaborators. Actually, right now, I'm in Manchester at the BBC North office. They were co-funders for my PhD, which I started in 2015. I graduated in 2020, and partners on, well, I believe all of my current projects. Also work with repair cafes quite a bit around the UK. So they are grassroots establishments. They're very community-led initiatives to help foster the ethos of repair versus replace, especially around technologies where we are kind of working with. I also contribute to policy. So that's an opportunistic contribution that depends on what the Parliament has, put out calls for. So I think I should start with my job title, Transitional Assistant Professor. What is that? I get asked that quite a lot. It means that I cleared the interview for my assistant professorship. But at the time in 2021, I had less than a year of experience as a postdoctoral researcher. So they were kind enough to give me some time to work upon my research, which is basically writing bids, succeeding, failing, persevering, forming teams, working in teams, leading these teams, especially multidisciplinary teams, etc. Before I take up, a whole bunch of teaching. So I graduated my PhD, as I said, in 2020, mid-pandemic. And I wrote my first bid application during my stint as a postdoc, actually, I think a couple of weeks after, my submission. And it was actually for the HDI, Human Data Interaction Plus Network. This was a £10,000 award where I wrote in a small study that would build upon my PhD work. I worked with my supervisor, Professor Derek Macaulay, at the well, he's still my mentor, and the BBC to bring together the interests of the project partners and our primary aims to form a coherent narrative. It was quite a learning curve for me because I had never even seen a project proposal before. And hence I knew absolutely nothing about budgets, especially. It helped me a lot, this process. I also learned that it's key to start with a basic budget before making elaborate plans, especially when there are partners involved. A lesson that was reinforced further when the amount of the bids and the number of people involved increased. So one easy way to manage expectations is to start with a framework budget. So we're right now writing a rather big bid, and we're doing the same here, so we know who is working on it, how much time. So this is like the basic stuff. This is the stuff that you need in a project. It's not a luxury. So it's important to put that into numbers, see how much that is, and then see how much money you have left so that you can start planning activities. You can start making promises to yourself and your collaborators if you have any based on that. So focusing on the Network Plus bid, for me, it was very straightforward as my research was around human data interaction during my PhD. And this was the human data interaction HDI plus network that I was applying to. So I would suggest while writing, any kind of proposal, constantly and consistently kind of aligning with the call and its priorities. This reinforcement will help ground your research around the expectations of the call. If that doesn't happen, it's usually a hard no. The next thing was something my mentor asked me to do, to always ensure that the proposal had high-level aims, the stuff that would kind of change the world, but also break it down to very actionable steps. So what are you going to do to achieve your aims and your objectives? Make this very, very clear. And finally, when you're writing the proposal, what I do is I remember that the reviewers are human beings. So I always write for someone who might be having the worst day possible. I write in the most precise, I try to write in the most precise language, to be to the point, use efficient graphics where possible, because that means it's lesser text for them to read. Basically, the lesser effort they have to put in to understand the proposal, its aims, and how we are proposing to achieve them, the better it is for us. This is where I think an external informal review before submission would be helpful. It doesn't have to be a professor. It could be a friend or a colleague, who does not know about your work much, because that's great, actually, because if they understand it well, you've done something right there. So after this bid, my next one was to Petrus. It was a slightly larger amount. We went for 60K this time, which was match funded by the BBC. And then we put out an audience trial in the UK for a particular piece of technology using this money. And then we went on to an even bigger one with the Research Council this time. This was the ESRC, Equitable Societies call. Slightly more than $1 million, but that was 3 universities, Edinburgh, ourselves, Lancaster, and now Napier as well. It looks into the legal, the technical, the design aspects of technology sustainability. This bid was led by, this project still is led by early career researchers, myself and my friends from Edinburgh, Lancaster, Napier, but supported extensively by our mentors who are professors. But again, we lead the work packages at the different institutions. So we designed them. We wrote the proposals and proposed the project. So it was a great learning experience, working with people from different institutions and disciplines to draw out a proposal that addressed a space that we are very passionate about in a multidisciplinary, dare I say, rather innovative manner. But the framework, irrespective of the amount, the number of people, the institutions involved, it is pretty much the same, whether it's Network Plus or it's a Research Council bid. I think it's a matter of staying true to that framework that you've got in hand, and I think the rest just falls in place. I think that should be my time. Yeah, happy to talk about things later, or in the question answer Q&A session.
Thanks so much. I think writing for somebody who's having the worst possible day is a great thing to bear in mind for everything in life. I shall hold that thought next time I'm even writing an email. Thanks so much. I think we'll pass on to Louise now, if you're ready, Louise.
Thank you very much. My name is Louise Hickman. I'm currently based at the Minderoo Centre at the University of Cambridge, and I will give you a brief description of myself. I am wearing headphones and glasses and a little bit of lipstick on. I'm a white woman with a kind of green pattern jumper on, And in the background, it's a little bit Squid Game-ish. There's 3 doors behind me, so whatever one I go through, something might happen. Yeah, so that's the audio description, my visual description done. So I'm going to briefly talk about my career so far, and I guess this could sort of frame my return to the UK. And in that sense, I feel a bit like an anthropologist looking at funding here because it's so new to me. And I will explain that in a minute. And then in the kind of second part, I'm going to kind of briefly talk about my funded project by Digit, DIGIT, which focuses on the future of work. And then I'll talk about that. So, who I am. I did my PhD at UC San Diego in California in the Department of Communication, which allowed me to specialize in critical disability studies and critical access studies, and using a kind of feminist SDS framework to think about technology. While I was at UC San Diego, I was a part of the Feminist Labor Lab. We did a lot of kind of research with very much based in the community. So we were, for example, looking at how taxi drivers can develop an app that can promote fair wages. And inside that, we would look at how that would support accessibility too. So in many ways, my work is quite intersectional. I'm always trying to find ways of looking at access in conversation with labor. So this is kind of a different take on thinking about access, in that it's not so much about, well, it is about digital infrastructure, but it's really thinking about the kind of ethics, the demands, the precarities of the labor that is in, question. But I should say that my actual dissertation was on captioning, so like the demand of real-time labor. So like today we have a professional captioner who is doing the caption for us, which we could get into the kind of politics around what is automated captions, who's that good for, who, and I'm thinking, on the horizon here, the Digital Good Network is like, what kind of questions we want to ask. So I returned to the UK during the pandemic, which I did a postdoc with the Ada Lovelace Institute and London School of Economics on the Just AI network. And now I'm at Mindaroo. So if I so last year I applied for a innovation grant from the Digit, focusing on the future of work, and this grant ranges from 20 to 50,000 pounds each, and they typically award around 3 or 4 per round. And my round that I applied for was the 4th round. And the reason I'm flagging this up, because one of the issues that I came up with was really thinking about what can I do for 20,000, for example, because the Digit network really encouraged to apply on the lower end of the scale in order to make more awards. So with that, there was an emphasis on value for money. And this comes back around to this kind of anthropological point I was making earlier, like coming back to the UK and not really understanding how the funding research councils work here. I had to spend a lot of time talking to my peers and perhaps other researchers that are in the similar career stage as myself to really understand what can I do for 20,000? So in terms of scale and value for money, and as well as building this out, as kind of lay down on some of the kind of previous work I've done, I've also built into that grant kind of connection to the community. For example, the grant that I did was in partnership with, actually shifted now to Grand Union in Birmingham. And we will be working together to commission a series of fiction work, which the fiction work is going to be based on a series of interviews with access workers. I've gone about this in a roundabout back-to-back way of describing this project, but essentially what I'm doing is looking at how the digitization of access is changing for workers within the UK and the US. So in that sense, in the kind of like pulling out a little bit and like thinking about, well, why do the interviews, why the fiction work? And really, I'm trying to find a way to do the kind of translation work of like how to build research within the kind of more kind of social science, but then move it towards art, and then come back to thinking about, well, what does that translation work does for public policy. So there's kind of like the three various stages of the project where I'm really thinking about centering the community, so like looking at community-led work, but also centering a practice that looks at accessibility for all stakeholders, and also thinking how can we bring that voice into policy making. And that is something admittedly I'm new at, and I'm still trying to figure this out, but this grant gave me the opportunity to really think about what did it mean to do this work. And I'm sure there are many questions I can answer in the Q&A section, but that is really the kind of, oh yeah, one last point I should make is, I mentioned there were 4 stages of the digit. There was an archives of previous projects. Now it's another way of kind of looking at what other people have done and what scale and what methodologies is new. So I understand that you guys are not in the same position, but it was a really good resource for kind of thinking about how to build this out. And I think I'm going to hand that over to Robin.
Great, thank you, Louise. I hope everyone can hear me. So to start with my visual description, I'm a white woman. I'm wearing glasses and a black t-shirt, actually, with some flowers on it. It's not cold in Copenhagen where I am, so I'm lucky, unlike those of you in England. And I'm in a white room. I promise I have books elsewhere in this room. It's not just a white box. So I'm going to talk today about my experience getting funding from Human Data Interaction Network Plus. So I guess the same as Nalima. And also, I guess I'll start with a bit about myself. So I really have 2 research streams, I guess, that kind of come together in various ways. I did my PhD studying African film at SOAS in London, looking at the labor of making movies and a lot about issues of diversity in the film industry in a global context, because these filmmakers I examined work in Kenya, but also elsewhere, and back and forth and back and forth. And that took me to my first postdoc, which I did in Sheffield as a creative economy engagement fellow, where we were studying data diversity and inequality in the media, working with Ria Jones from the BBC. And then from Sheffield, I moved to Copenhagen, where I'm currently doing a postdoc where I look at kind of digital culture in media in Ghana, amongst other things, but carrying on that interest in digital inequality, diversity, and so on. So back in 2019, I guess, yes, I got a £10,000 grant from the HDI Human Data Interaction Network Plus, working with myself, Helen Kennedy, and Ria Jones from the BBC, for a project called Public Trust in Data-Driven Systems and AI Futures. And the aim with our project was to explore public perceptions of data futures and the criteria for trusted data practices. So we really linked up with kind of a public discourse about the nature of trust and how trust would be vital in the new kind of data economy. So it really connected with kind of current events in somehow, or current discourse and policy-making discourse. And what we proposed in our grant was a kind of methodological experiment where we would try to understand the best methods for engaging with publics on topics related to trust and data, and see basically what's the best way of doing that, knowing that these practices are often complex, difficult to understand, even to people who are experts, and what is it? But also knowing that accounting for the views of everyone, every citizen, is important in civil society. But how do we understand their views? How can we best capture them as researchers? So we proposed bringing the citizen jury method to answer this question, where we called them in our proposal enhanced focus groups, but we actually did a citizen jury where we brought in experts to talk to 12 people in a day-long workshop where they would basically learn about the issues and debate them. And we had different tools where we'd account for their feelings, about how at various points in the day, but really working from the assumption that, if policymakers get, briefs and information and then can make informed decisions on that basis to understand any issue, that same thing could be said for citizens. So it was testing this method, and I think what worked really well with the project, and I think with what contributed to us getting the funding, was that we proposed both a quite academic contribution, testing a methodology, but also promised real world concrete impact to ask the question, what does the public consider might constitute good future data practices? And we asked them to create a criteria of the top 5 things that would make them trust data practices based on an informed assessment. So we really had a concrete finding that we could speak about, while also having an academic one, or very academic one, methodological testing. So I think that was key. It was also important to say that this project directly targeted the theme, and Nalima said that explicitly, that we kept writing in the language of the call, saying how we directly addressed aspects of it. I think the fact that it was novel, explicitly saying we've got this new methodology, that's what we're doing. And that it was feasible because it built on existing research and an existing research collaboration. At that point, when we applied, I'd been working with Helen and Ria for 18 months. And we'd just done a survey asking users, or asking citizens in the UK about their views about data and trust and models of managing data, and explicitly framed this research as a qualitative follow-up to that, to explore things that we couldn't capture in the survey, and to compare methodologies. But it also meant that we didn't need any time to build a research team, get to know each other, kind of get started. We already were started, we were continuing. So I think that helped with making it very, very targeted and very feasible. And I think the final thing, which I'll emphasize again, was that we were working in collaboration with industry, with the BBC, mostly in this case. And we promised practical results alongside academic ones. yeah, I think that's what I'll say. And I'm of course happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Before we go to questions, I think we'll move on to Roz's material and then we'll come back for questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we have a few slides to share and hopefully someone will be able to put those up for us. Just bear with us. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. So my name is Ros Williams. I'm a senior lecturer in Digital Media and Society at the University of Sheffield, and I'm an associate director of the Digital Good Network. It's been a pleasure to hear our panelists talk about all of their activities and their really exciting careers so far. And part of the reason that we invited our three brilliant panelists to speak today was so we could inspire some of you to apply for the Digital Good Research Fund and some of the other activities that our network will be undertaking over the next 5 years or so. Before I get into that, I've not given a visual description of myself, so I shall do that now. I've got light skin, I'm a mixed race woman. I've got kind of curly hair, but it's all tied back and you can't really see it at the minute. And I've got big round glasses on and a grey jumper. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, depending on the day. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about very quickly was the Digital Good Research Fund. So as you'll know, and as Sarah's already explained, the Digital Good Network is a very large investment from the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, part of UCRI, UK Research and Innovation. And that whole kind of set of funding, part of that is for us to redistribute it, to build a network. And one of the ways we want to do that is through redistributing the funding through a research fund to enable you to apply to do research that relates to the digital good and some of the key questions that we want to explore through our network. So if you have a look at some of the recordings of yesterday and the day before, you'll hear a range of different speakers talking about the Digital Good Network and some of the things that we'd like to be able to achieve together with you, the larger research network that we hope to help to cultivate through research. And you'll be able to learn more about the digital good and the kinds of foci that we're trying to encourage there. But just to give you some of the sense of practicalities, in case anyone has any questions today, and you can find out plenty more information on the website at the bottom of this slide. Just wanted to run through what it is we're looking for in this first round. So the broad theme of this first call is the foundations of the digital good. It's very, very broad. And as my colleague Dan Richards yesterday, if you saw the talks yesterday, explained, that's done on purpose. We want a very, very broad remit so that we can invite lots of different applications that might be thinking about the digital good from lots of different perspectives. So we're inviting, as the slides say, proposals that are going to explore the digital good, but specifically how we define it and the terms that we use to discuss it. We're also interested in methodological innovation. So that could be anything from qualitative to quantitative to other kinds of methods that perhaps sort of bridge that binary divide. We'd also like to explore different technologies, dimensions and perspectives of the digital good. And vitally, one of the things that we want to do through the network is research, is to connect our research communities with other kinds of organizations and communities external to academia. So moving beyond just academic networks into other parts of society, whether that's in industry, the third sector or the cultural sectors. And so what we're trying to do to achieve that is launch this scheme, and the funding deadline is toward the end of April. What we're asking for is applications that are within the region of £20,000 to £50,000. So if you're interested in what those letters there, FEC or FEC mean, that means that we fund at 80%. You can get more information on what all of that means practically for you as an applying team on the Digital Good Network website. And we will be having a sandpit. Now, the sandpit is essentially just an opportunity. Dan Richards yesterday called it a mixer. So the people could get together and talk about their ideas and perhaps make sort of connections and networks to help them to foster and develop applications for the research fund. And that sandpit will be taking place 27th of March, so toward the end of this month. And there is an expression of interest so that we can, because we expect a lot of interest, what we're trying to do is make sure that we've got lots of people there with lots of different disciplinary and empirical focuses there, so we can really make some interesting connections. So what we're asking is that people fill in expression of interest forms so that we can let them know whether they'll be able to come along to that sandpit on the 27th. And the deadline for that is the 14th of March. Just to flag, if you can't make that, it does not mean that you cannot apply for the fund, nor does coming along to that mean that you definitely will apply for the fund, or that indeed, if you do, you will be funded. Just to clarify that, there's a full review process to the research fund. So that's the first part that I wanted to talk about today. If we could have the next slide, I'll just speak about the second one. Thank you so much. So the Digital Good Network Summer School is another thing that we're going to be putting on each year. If you yourself are a PhD student, or if you know somebody that what I'm about to say might be appealing for or useful for, then please do forward on this information to them. Again, it's on the website digitalgood.net. This is a fully funded opportunity for PhD researchers who are in their second year or above. And the purpose of that is to make sure essentially that they've gone through confirmation review or upgrade. And the value of this opportunity is essentially so that you can talk about your research, get feedback from your peers, and get some training in various different aspects of academic life and other ways of sort of engaging in the academic landscape. So, for example, this year we'll be focusing on public engagement. We'll have a masterclass with a bunch of people who've done lots of public engagement, so you can learn about how you might translate or communicate your work to a range of different publics. We'll also be having a fantastic keynote from Dr. Lukasz Schultz, who's a senior lecturer at the University of Manchester. He'll be talking about his research on LGBTQ+ people and their use of digital media technology, with an opportunity to talk about his work and how it might relate to issues of the digital good. So we'll be publishing some of the activities that are going to be available over that summer school over the next month or so. So do look out for communications on our social media feeds over March to learn more. Again, that will be taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of June. So this year it's a shorter summer school. In future years it will be longer. So if it doesn't feel as though this is sort of the right time for you as a PhD student to apply, don't fret. There will be opportunities down the line. And the application date for that is the 24th of March. There's an application form and you can get information about that on the digitalgood.net website as well. So those are the sorts of two kind of key things that we're launching at the moment. There will also be a scheme for internships and fellowships that will be sending out more information out over the next few months. So please do get in touch with us to get put onto our mailing list. You can find information again about how to do that on our website. What I'll do now, though, is I'll pass it back over to Sarah, because it looks like we've got lots of questions starting to come in on the Q&A. So thank you so much all for your time.
Many thanks, Ross. I think we can lose, yeah, perfect. We lose the slide, and we've got some questions coming in. While I am looking over those questions, I'd just like to ask all the panelists really how securing Network Plus and other types of funds have progressed your career and your research agenda. That's, I'm assuming that it has done. If you could give us a flavour of how specifically, that'd be great. Who would like to pick that one up first? Nellie, I feel like you're inching towards the unmute. Thank you.
Happy to. So I think, well, as an early career researcher, writing bids and securing them as well, the whole process becomes a big part of your career progress in many ways. First of all, you start thinking about projects, not just from working within a project perspective, from how can I design, new research? How can I further my current agenda? So you kind of start forward thinking quite a bit, which I think is very important as a researcher in academia, industry, wherever. Second is, I think it helps with collaboration. For instance, the sandpit that's going to happen. These are the kind of events and possibilities that help you understand what others are doing around you and how you can work with them and how you can form like a, how do I put it, a collaborative team where you have skill sets that kind of complement each other. And I think that's very important, like a diverse yet kind of like a mutually exhaustive but complementary team would help you. So building something like that is helpful. And I think engaging with writing bits kind of helps with that. And it also kind of opens up a whole new aspect of, this is only within academia, kind of like the administrative side, which I think as a PhD student, you're completely unaware of. So you start thinking about numbers, you start thinking about all the kind of like the satellite events that happen beyond just your research, which is also important as part of your, career progress. As far as that is concerned. So I think there are different aspects of it, all of which kind of feed into your, at least for me, for my career progress. I keep using the word learning curve, because for me, it was exactly that. Like, I learned so much. I still learn a lot every time I write a proposal. I mean, I can go on, but I'm just going to stop and ask if anyone else wants to contribute to that.
If it's all right, Sarah, I can add to that. Yeah, I think what was really, I think, helpful in applying for this small grant, the Network Plus grant, was that it was quite fast. For a lot of the early career funding in the UK, you apply and then maybe a year later you hear back or something. But this was like, okay, here's how you can write a grant. To think, administratively about what that means, but also it felt relatively low stakes in some ways to apply, and like a space where an idea could be tested out to practice like research grant skills without thinking like, okay, this is going to take you 6 months to write this project or something. And I think that was really helpful for me.
I've actually forgotten the question, but I'm just going to go with the flow of what
just quickly
has been.
It was basically, how has getting the funding progressed your research agenda in your career? And after that, I'm going to go to some of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay, very quickly, I just wanted to add to the general flow, as well as kind of adjusting, being back in the UK and like reorientating myself to the research landscape here. I also just wanted to add that I actually think the small grants is a really good opportunity to start thinking about the type of team you want to work with. I mean, this is like the opportunity to align yourself with people that have similar values. So like, for example, access might be a value that's important for me. And that had guided the research process in terms of thinking about the grant, because I can center that. So I kind of just want to kind of highlight that as a kind of plus, an exciting part of the grant process. And that is obviously a part of who I'm building as a careerist, whatever. Career is an awful word, but yeah, back to you, Sarah. Sorry.
No worries, yeah. We embrace being careerist and ambitious for ourselves.
That was a terrible choice of words, but
not at all. Always a great question. I'm going to go to this one first. One top tip, please. I was asked this on a panel last night, International Women's Day, and I completely went blank. Thanks, Robin.
I guess the biggest thing is think about, who you're working with and why that team can work together and why it makes sense that it's those specific people working together. If there's an industry partner, like who's that going to be and what are they going to contribute, and how does that complement what you can contribute, what everyone can contribute? Because I think in my experience in working on quite a few research projects now is like this, they succeed or fail in actually producing good research that has impact that isn't, that feels good to create if you have a good team dynamic. And a grant is a place to build a team. So think about who should be on that team.
Thanks. I'm just going to pick on Nalima next.
All right. I think I was just thinking about it right now, and I was like, it would be something like, especially because I work in multidisciplinary teams, it's often adapt, adjust, and just move on. So if it's during the writing phase, different collaborators would have different, wants, needs, and so be prepared to be flexible with your plans. Be prepared to, change things a bit. Don't be too rigid. And even during execution of the project, sometimes what you proposed, like let's say COVID hit, and we all had to kind of change our, research methods, we had to adapt. So I think throughout the project, being open to flexibility and looking at the others' wants and needs as well, and making sure everything is brought in, because only then can you push a project forward successfully. Everyone has to be represented. Everyone's priorities has to be respected and brought into the project. So yeah, making sure that is there. So I think as a researcher, we should be open to adapting, adjusting, and kind of moving on with that.
Thank you. Louise, do you have a top tip?
I think perhaps thinking about budgeting. If there's like a member of your team that's good at it, or your center, I'm in a research center, so I have the opportunity to work with the head of research, and start to think through what budget might look like and what the restrictions are, which obviously is different from grant to grant, but how the budget relates to the narrative is really key here. And so, yeah.
Thank you. There are some valuable questions in the Q&A. Ros, you had a couple of questions. I love a question about failure, because it's always great to celebrate successes. But I mean, everybody loves thinking about other people's failures a bit. Ros, do you want to put?
Yeah, I would love to. It just struck me, as someone who's failed many times in various efforts to kind of rise up the career ladder, although we're not trying to think in careerist terms. I'd love to hear from you guys based on what Nilima said, because you did mention that there was there were some failures on the way to some success, and I think it would be useful just to hear what it means to fail, and to what extent that has helped to inform eventual successes you may have had. I don't know, Nilima, maybe you want to take that. Maybe Louise and Robin, you something to add.
Yeah, I mean, of course, failures are always part of the journey. It's just, I keep saying people only see the success, but there's always something behind it where it must have failed and you learn from it. So I think bids wise, I've had only one major, which was my first like big PI kind of thing. But it was more of a fit to call issue with that, which is where I learned the key, the importance of, I think two of us talked about, both Robin and I today, about how important it is to consistently ground your work within the call, to make sure that whatever you're pitching for is kind of written in the language of the call. Because when reviewers read it, I think that is that's what they're looking for. They want to see how your proposed, response or a solution kind of adheres with their agenda or what they're looking for right now in that space. So that was, that was something something very practical that I learned from my, failure.
Thank you. Thank you for embracing that one.
I I did have a quick thing to add there. I'm all about failure. I think in the early stages of my grad career, I read the Jack Halberstam Queer Art of Failure. So like I'm a huge fan for different reasons, but I just wanted to add on a different grant, which were the network grants, interestingly enough. And what was really interesting was the demands or the expectations or the aspiration of the call meant that I was pulled in different directions. And the sense what I learned from that call, I didn't get the grants, but what I learned was that when there is a kind of high aspirations or the shopping list with many different demands, it actually scale back and actually like scale back in a way that's like walking through the steps and looking at the call, looking at the language and really figuring out how to do it in a way that is practical. Yeah, thank you.
Then there's a good one to tackle here about the implication of the term early career researcher. I'm going to have a bash at answering it. If I'm wrong, academics put me right. When we use the term in museums, early career, it has absolutely no relationship to age. There might be I guess you could project that onto the idea that, you know, that maybe is a conventional career route or something that you're younger. But I, for instance, was an early career museum worker in my late 30s because I'd had a previous career. So my understanding is that there is, and I should hope this be true of academics and the world of academia, that early career has no bearing on age. And particularly there's no age limit for the summer school. I kind of fascinated by the idea that perhaps summer school sounds kid-like, and that maybe there's an idea that there's sort of like only for the youthful. I would like to go to summer school. I'm not youthful, but I do like the idea of play. So if that's being conveyed, that it's playful, then yes, but playful at any age. So I'm taking from the nods and expressions that I've got that one right.
Sorry, could I just also mention that if you do go on the digitalgood.net website, on the opportunities section where we talk about the Digital Good Research Fund, if you do scroll down to who can apply, it gives you a link to the ESRC's or UCRI's guidance on what they consider to be an early career researcher. And it is a happily broad church. Lots of people would fit into it, and it has nothing to do with age. It does have to some extent to do with distance from PhD, and you can make various different cases for being closer or further from the PhD completion. And indeed, in some cases, you might not even have a PhD to be considered an early career researcher. But in terms specifically of the summer school, absolutely not. But you would need to be enrolled as a PhD student.
Great. Also, are projects already in progress acceptable to enter this?
Shall I take that one, Sarah?
Please.
What we're hoping for is for people to apply with just discrete activities, projects, or what have you, that they can get funded. We wouldn't normally anticipate that would be kind of topping up research that's already taking place. It might be to extend an idea that you've already been piloting somewhere, for example, or it might be an extension of a piece of research you've already done, but it wouldn't just be to sort of extend an ongoing piece of activity. So we would like it to be clear how the project has been designed in relation to the call and in relation to the focus of the Digital Good Network. And if you can make that happen, if you can, as Nilima says, and as Robin was saying as well, make it fit with the call, then it's absolutely something that we will consider. But it should, we think, be sort of its own piece of research that can be undertaken, or its own activities that can be undertaken as a discrete, over a discrete period of time.
Great. I'm going to go to the specific one for you, Robin. It's not so much about applications, but it's about the method that you were talking about. Are there any publications about that method?
Yes, there are, happily. Yes, so it's the citizen jury method, and we published it very much like a methodological step-by-step guide based on our findings in a book chapter. And now I can't remember the name of the book.
You may be allowed to take the time and post that in the chat, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. And then there's a specific one which I'm sure will be relevant to many. I'm just going to read it out because then I won't misrepresent it. This person is trying to navigate short-term contracts. I'm on a short-term contract which finishes in September and have an idea for a project. Would I need to find a PI in my current institution and ask my university to extend my contract until the showcase in January? Or would I be able to take the funding to my new post, the TBC new post?
So what we would ask is that you have a conversation with your institution to find out what they'll be able to support you with, bearing in mind that the ESRC and we as the kind of the funder of these projects funds at 80%, you'd need some level of institutional support up to 20% to top up the grant, which is a common thing in the UK, particularly with UCRI funded work. So if you can get that support, then you could, for example, apply for salary and that kind of thing as part of this. Now that means that you could then essentially, if your institution was in support of that, extend your contract for that period of time. It is very much on a case-by-case basis though. So if you've got any questions about that, it's probably worth initially having a conversation with your research office. And then if there's any lack of clarity, then getting in touch with the information email at the Digital Good Network, so we can sort of help to give you a bit more guidance with that. Importantly though, what we are trying to do is to engage people, including people on precarious contracts, because we recognize the value of this kind of funding for that. And so there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't apply as a PI if you can get that support, or as a co-I if somebody else is willing to support you in the creation of a bid. The point about the showcase, though, you wouldn't need to be employed by the institution where you did the research to come to the showcase. The showcase is a separate commitment that you make as an awardee of the Digital Good Research funding to come along and tell us what you've been up to. So it's quite a separate component, but related.
Two chunky questions, well, potentially chunky ones, as we are starting to come to the close. Could you tackle the one from Amira there, please, Ros? Could you elaborate on the values that are at the heart of Digital Good Network and that are central to you? What futures are you imagining during that question?
Yeah, it's a big old question, Amira. And probably the first thing I would do is direct you back to the webinar that we had on Tuesday. We talked about, the question was, what is the digital good? And we had a panel, including myself, Helen Kennedy, who's the director of the Digital Good Network, and Gina Neff, who you may know, who's an associate director of the Digital Good Network alongside myself. And we talked about that in relation to 3 societal challenges, which are equity, resilience, and sustainability. And we understand those in a range of different ways that are sort of inflected with lots of different disciplinary insights. So what I would do as a first port of call, rather than trying to sort of scrabble together a response in our final couple of minutes, is invite you to look at that webinar, have a look at our website where we can explain some of that rationale. But what I would just say is, you're asking us what futures we're imagining, it's less about us trying to tell you what the future should look like, but invite you into that conversation through these different mechanisms like the Digital Good Research Fund, so that you can participate as researchers, as civil society organisations, so on and so forth, in helping us to think through and eventually begin to answer that question: what should a digital society look like and how can we make it good through technology?
Great. I think we can squeeze in this one last one before I'm going to wrap us up. Are research affiliates with no employment contract able to apply if their institution allows them to be a PI?
The specifics around who can be a PI is entirely related to whether you are attached to a university that is a university or organisation that is UCRI funding eligible. All of the information about eligibility for UCRI funding is on the UCRI website, and it's linked to through the digitalgood.net website in the opportunities and in these areas about eligibility and who can apply. So any information about that, you should be able to get there. If it is at all unclear, then please do get in touch with us via the email on the contact us page on our website.
Thanks to you. Thanks, Robin, Nalima, Louise. Thanks to all of you for coming. Our future seminars and events can be found on our website. You can find us on Twitter, Mastodon, and LinkedIn. Sign up for our mailing list if you haven't. Any more questions, comments, or feedback, do get in touch. info@digitalgood.net. Thank you so much for joining, and have a good rest of your day.